Today I'm going to go over my reading goals for 2020. 2019, I mostly tried focusing on how many books I could read in a year, and I really wanted to get to 52 again. I guess it was 2018. 2018 I read like 63, and so I was like, you can do it again, but I don't know, the more and more that I've been trying to hit quantity goals, I've realized that I'm just not picking quality books anymore. So I keep feeling like I'm having lackluster reading years. Like, I looked through and I only had like 4 books that were over 4 stars for me last year. And that's just kind of unacceptable. My reading is about me, adventuring into new perspectives and learning about other cultures and learning about just other people. And just instead I was reading the same book over and over again, just by different people with slightly different characters. Because it was either a short or something that I was like, this is super easy and I'll be able to hit my goals. So it was making me avoid books that I thought were things that I really should be focusing on instead. So I decided that this year I would come up with certain prompts to hit, so that way I would get my version of quality this year. Now, I can't guarantee that I'm going to love every single book. I can't guarantee that every single book is going to be like 4 stars or higher for me. I can't guarantee that they're going to be written well, etc., etc. But I can guarantee that they are going to be opening my mind to new perspectives that I did not read this past year. And that's the most I can ask for. So that's my biggest reading goal, will be these 28 prompts that I'll go over in a minute. My second reading goal will be to finish any book that I started in 2018 that I didn't finish, which was a few. And these were ones that, not that I was like, I'm not finishing it. It was like definitely not a DNF. I just did not finish it. And then my other goal is to try and finish some series that I've started, because I'm in like 15 series and I'm not finished with any of them. And when I say that, like, series that I'm in that I want to finish, it's never going to be series that I'm like, I read the first book and I was like, I have to continue the series. No, these are like legitimate series that I want to read and that I want to finish, and I want to know what happens, but I just haven't been reading them. So here we go. So I'm going to start off with my prompt goals first. So the first prompt that I had was to read a book by an author of color that's won an award. So for that one, I chose The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I'm not sure. I'm anglicizing the hell out of it, and I apologize to this author for not learning their name before I made a video. But anyways, I'm going to be reading this one. It won the Booker Prize, and the author is from Sri Lanka, and I don't know that I've ever read a book by an author from Sri Lanka, so it felt like a fitting one for this prompt. The second prompt is to read a book written by a journalist. I so rarely read anything by journalists because normally their writings are found in like magazines and in like anthologies, like short story compendiums, that kind of thing, or like online resources, just a lot of things, newspapers, things that I don't read. So I wanted to make sure that I'm also looking into books that they've written. And so I chose The Phantom of Fifth Avenue by Meryl Gordon. It's about the mysterious life and scandalous death of heiress Huguette Clark. I like biographies generally because I get to learn about a person that I didn't really know that much about. And it also just seemed like she was an interesting character. For the next prompt, I wanted to pick books that were written by like an own voice for someone from Central or South America. A key thing that I forgot to mention was that all of these books are ones that I already had on my shelf, so I'm not like going out and buying other ones. I wanted to make sure that I'm actually reading ones that I already own because I have a bit of a hoarding problem with books. So I'm gonna read it and see what I think. Then for the fourth prompt, I wanted to pick a book that is about a mythology that I don't know a lot about. So I know that I've read a lot of Greek mythology, I've read some Norse mythology, I've read some Roman mythology, and though I have read some Native American mythology in college that I read for a paper, I still can't say that I've read enough of our First Nations mythologies to truly understand it like I do Greek and Roman mythology. And so I have this book that I got from the Barnes & Noble Collector editions of Native American Myths and Legends. Certain media of literature that I just don't generally read at all is poetry, which is kind of ironic considering that I used to edit it for like 2 years, but I don't really frequent it anymore. And so I owned this collected poems of Emily Dickinson, and I thought that this was a very fitting book to read for that because she's an amazing poet and I don't know enough about her stuff. Next, I wanted to read a book by an LGBTQIA author. I know that I've read a lot of books in the past by people who are LGBTQIA, but I never did it in a way where I was like very mindful that I was picking a book by someone who is LGBTQIA. So I wanted to be purposeful. And it's Room by Emma Donoghue. I also think that it's good to read self-care or self-learning books. I don't do that enough. So I chose this book called Mindfulness, an 8-week plan for finding peace in a frantic world by Mark Williams and Danny Penman, who are both PhDs for clinical psychology. And I think the other one is just a PhD writer. So they wrote it together. I know that my life is always super frantic, and I'm like, why not try and find a little bit more like calmness? In reading a lot of books, you know, trying to hit 52, you tend to avoid larger books because you're like, that is going to slow me down. I don't have time for that, which stinks because there are some books over 500 pages which really have fantastic stories to tell. And the character development and the plot development and the atmosphere are generally better because they have so much more time to expound on ideas. But I was missing all of them because I was like, I will hit 52. But I was like, this year you're going to read a big book. So I decided to pick The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. This won the Man Booker Prize. Pretty cool. Like, I mean, that's a really prestigious award, so this must be a fantastic book. Hopefully. I've definitely read award books before where I'm like, well. Next, I wanted to pick a biography. I love biographies, but I haven't been reading a lot of them lately. So I went with Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. I adore Jon Krakauer's writing. He's one of the best writers, especially in nonfiction. But honestly, I think his writing could translate to fiction if he so wanted. I wanted to read a book about mental health because I think it's very important. So I intended to pick a book written about that. But instead, I kept finding myself drifting toward this novel instead. And though it's not technically a mental illness, it's a brain degenerative disorder, I still think mental health is a really big aspect of this disorder. So essentially I went with Still Alice by Lisa Genova, which is a book about Alzheimer's. I've never read a book about Alzheimer's, and I think that it could be a really moving one. Okay, actually, I have read a book about Alzheimer's. It was The Notebook. The author, Lisa Genova, actually holds a PhD in neuroscience, and she writes a lot for the National Alzheimer's Association, so I feel like she should be able to handle the topic appropriately. Next, I wanted to read a book by a woman author of color. I decided for this one to choose Tomi Adeyemi's Children of Blood and Bone. I've heard, again, nothing but great things about this novel. I know that they raved about it on BookTube when it came out. I'm also going to be buddy reading this with a friend, so I'm very excited about that. And it's probably going to be one of the first ones that I actually break into because we're buddy reading it this month. Another thing I noticed is that I don't necessarily read a lot of books from people from other parts of the world. I want to widen my scope and read more, especially from people who are living different experiences and seeing the world in a completely different set of eyes than I ever will. So I decided to start off with an Eastern European author, and I chose Night Watch by Sergei Lukyanenko. I think that's right, but I don't think it's right. It's not right. But anywho, my good friend who I will be buddy reading with in January gave me this book for my birthday last year, and I'm finally getting to it. So continuing on the trip around the world, I decided to pick a book by an Asian author. So I went with First They Killed My Father, A Daughter of Cambodia Remembers by Loang Ung. I'm not sure. I'm just butchering names. That's the name of the game. I really need to learn how to pronounce names before I make videos because it's embarrassing. But anyways, this is a memoir about a young girl during Pol Pot's regime in the 70s. And this should be pretty powerful, and it'd just be good to open my eyes to things that, though I learned about in college, like I never really learned about them. It was just like a byline of something that happened in the 70s. So then I decided to pick an author from Oceania, which is like Australia and Polynesia and a few other countries. And I could not for the life of me find one. I had this book chosen for a different prompt, and then I was like, oh wait, that guy's Australian. So I decided to go with it, and it's The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. Then I picked an African author, and I went with Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. This is about, like, apparently it's the most famous and important novel in South African history, which seems like something I should read. Then I wanted to read a book about the environment. I really wanted to read a lot more nonfiction this year because I don't think I read any the past year. So I went with Waste and Want, A Social History of Trash by Susan Strasser. I know that it's not technically about the environment, but it's literally affecting the environment. The more trash we have, the more landfills we have, so the worse off our environment is. So it's a really important thing for me to understand because I would like to produce less trash. Next, I wanted to pick a book by a woman that has won awards, so I went with Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. It won the National Book Award. Next, I wanted to pick a historical nonfiction because I, again, don't read enough nonfiction. So I went with Thunderstruck by Eric Larson. Next, I decided I wanted to read a classic, so I picked The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. I really liked Les Mis, and this one's been sitting on my shelf for a while, so time. Next, I wanted to pick a banned book. For this one, I chose Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Next, I wanted to pick a debut novel. So I went with We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal. And I'm also going to be buddy reading this one with my friend, so I'm very excited. I hope it's good. Next, I wanted to pick an investigative nonfiction. So this one is Under the Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer. It seems very interesting. I know very little about Mormonism, so I'm very curious to see what exactly I'm going to be getting into with this book. Next, I wanted to pick a book about science. So I have this beautiful version, again, of Barnes & Noble's books, and I decided to go with A Brief History of Time and The Universe in a Nutshell by Stephen Hawking. And I'm going to read both of them, I hope, because I want to finish the actual book, not just like the book inside.
I'm ready to get my mind blown a little bit.
Next, I wanted to pick a book about philosophy. So I decided to be a little bit cheeky. I didn't actually have any like philosophical books or like books like the Tao of Pooh, where it takes like the Tao Te Ching and then like puts a Winnie the Pooh spin on it to make it a bit more digestible. I didn't have anything like that. But I did have Sophie's World by Justine Gardner, which is a novel about the history of philosophy, which is close enough. So next I wanted to pick a book that was well loved by people. And for this one, I just went with a book that had been recommended to me because it was well loved by a friend of mine. And it's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. Next, I wanted to pick an award-winning book. So I went with The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay that won the Pulitzer by Michael Cabin. Then I wanted to pick a book about language. English is my native language, but it's also something that I work with every day for my job. Like, legitimately, I edit English all day long. So it seemed of import that I understand it even better than I already do. So I decided to go with The Mother Tongue English and How It Got That Way by Bill Bryson. It's supposed to be like kind of comedic as well, so it's not just like something dull about the history of English. It like is slightly funny. And finally, for the prompts, I wanted to pick one of the 100 most influential books by the BBC. So I went with Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. This is a book that most people read in high school, but it was never assigned to me, so I felt like it's now time to give this story a chance. So those were all the books for the prompts. Next, there were quite a few books that I started in 2019 that I never finished, that I still want to read. So the first one, I want to finish reading all of these stories by Roald Dahl in this really beautiful book from Barnes & Noble. It has Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. Next, I also want to finish A Death in the Family by James Agee. I am about 130 some odd pages into it. It's not bad. I put it down for a few reasons. It does kind of have quasi stream of consciousness, and that's never my cup of tea. So that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. I'm just not a huge fan of it. I also started both of these short story collections. One is classic horror stories, and then this one is The Phantom of the Opera and Other Gothic Tales. I had read The Phantom of the Opera in the past, but I haven't read a lot of these other short stories. And honestly, they shouldn't be difficult to get through. I meant to read them around October, but like, who says you can't read spooky stories like throughout the entire year? So I figure I'll just read a couple a month and then eventually I'll have them finished. And finally, the next book that I wanted to finish, and this one has been so difficult. Like every time I start it, I'm like, oh yeah, you're gonna get some momentum and you're just gonna keep going and it's gonna be great. And I don't, because it's so hard. I'm trying to read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in French. So it's Harry Potter à l'école des sorciers, and I'm on page 63. It's taken me a year to get to page 63. Now granted, a lot of that is like, I get overwhelmed by it, so then I don't touch it for a few days, and then a few days turns into a few weeks or months, and then I come back to it. And so this year I want to make sure that I don't do that. Then for all the series that I want to finish, I've gotten into so many, but the ones I think I could finish this year if I really try, I want to finish the Arc of a Scythe series, and read The Toll by Neal Shusterman. I also want to read Finale by Stephanie Garber to finish the Caraval series. I've liked it well enough so far. I'd like to know how it ends. I would also like to find Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab and finish that one. I want to buy Gemina and Obsidio and finish the Illuminae file series because it's really good so far and I want to know what happens. I want to buy Library of Souls, and though I won't finish that series, I at least want to read the next book in the series this year just to like further myself in the story. I'd also like to read the next book in the Ace of Spades series and read King of Fools by Amanda Foody. I got that in the Owl Crate last year, the year before, and I really liked it, so I want to see what happens. Same with Soul of Stars. That's the second book in Ashley Poston's Heart of Iron series, and I want to see what happens there. And then I want to read Scarlet by Marissa Meyer, the next book in the Lunar Chronicles series. And like, I also want to read Lethal White by Robert Galbraith, also known as J.K. Rowling. But that one I will only get from the library or buy used. I will not actually buy it outright from her, because due to some statements that she said, I refuse to buy books from her. I do not want to give authors money who have views that are super against mine, because I find that unethical. But anyway, way to end the video on a high note. Yee! But anyway, that's all of my reading goals for 2020, and I really hope for once that I meet all of them. We'll see. I'm off to a great start. It is going to be January 7th, and I have read nothing. Anyway, have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are.